Chapter 9. Nightfall in a New World. Night had fallen upon the land. The forest was in utter darkness. Virginia was sitting down by a campfire that Charles had made for her. She looked around. The light of the fire made the trees look like giants towering over her, followed by a series of tall giants silhouetted in the continuing distance of the woods before fading into the darkness. She pulled a blanket over her shoulders that Charles had left for her and looked back at the campfire, taking in its warmth. This is real. She placed her hands down on the earth. This is real. She pulled some grass out of the ground and looked at it. This is real. She looked up at the night sky through the canopy of the trees. She saw the stars. They were the same constellation as back home. She even saw the Big Dipper. The full moon shone brightly down upon the tops of the trees and the earth below. They are all real. She pulled out the dagger strapped around her thigh and looked at its blade in the reflection of the fire and moonlight. This is real. She sheathed her dagger and continued to look around. This can't really be it, could it? Is this Alaythia? She heard footsteps. Looking across the campfire, she saw Charles approaching her, carrying a large pile of logs and sticks. He placed them down on top of another pile of wood that he had previously collected. Amid its blue, silver, and yellow designs, Virginia could not help but notice something curious about Charles's war shirt. On the back of it, running from top to bottom and parallel with each other, were two slits about 1.5 feet long. Originally, she would have thought it to be two simple tears and nothing more. However, the edges of the slits were laced with leather straps, as if the shirt was designed to have two big decorated slits on the shoulder blades. Distracted by more critical issues, she never bothered to ask him about it and continued staring at the trees until he walked over and sat beside her. "Well, that should be enough for tonight," he said. "Charles," Virginia began, "do you remember the diary I told you I found?" She was hesitant to hear his response. Last time he got worried when she brought this up. "Please, don't be upset with me." He leaned his head back and looked up at the sky. "Yup." Virginia leaned back on her arms and looked up at him. "It was written by a girl about my age named Rose Cohen. What do you know of her?" Charles smiled. "She's a legend of Alaythia." "A legend?" "Yes, indeed." "How was she a legend?" "She was one of the greatest warriors ever to wield the metal of Oralmuti." "The metal of what?" Charles reached behind his head and grabbed the handle of the massive sword strapped behind his back. With a mighty stroke and a loud ring, he pulled it out of its sheath and held it out for Virginia to see. The blade was forged of the most unusual metal, unlike anything Virginia had ever seen. It was like glass, almost. She could clearly see her reflection in it. She reached out to touch it. The blade felt warm and crystal-like. She trailed her fingers down to touch the edge of it. Charles reached out and grabbed her hand to stop her. "Don't do that," he instructed. "Why?" she asked. "How sharp is it?" Charles took a blade of grass from the ground, held it above the edge of the sword, and let it fall. The strand of grass fell gracefully, but once it came in contact with the blade's edge, it split in two. "That's sharp," he said. Virginia quickly drew her hand away from the sword. Charles sheathed it back over his shoulder. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen," she said. "It doesn't even look like metal." "That's because it is not of our world back home," he said. "There are many things you will see here that may surprise you, but don't worry. The true warriors that carry this weapon fight for you, not against you." "The true warriors?" "Yes, the warriors of El Yamin." Virginia closed her eyes and shook her head. "Okay, back up. Who was El Yamin? How was Rose Cohen one of the greatest warriors in Alaythia? And who is this one I heard you speak of earlier? What was his name? Something?" Charles chuckled. "You have many questions, Virginia. Good questions, I might add. And I promised you that all your questions would be answered if you came with me here. And that's one of the reasons why I'm taking you to the city of Gaal." "That doesn't sound like a very pretty name." "The city of what?" "The city of Gaal. It is King El Yamin's city. It is where he trains his armies and teaches his students. It is a city west of here, beyond the Great Canyon and over the Twin Mountains. Many seek it. Only those who seek it with all their hearts find it. There, you will find all your answers." Virginia was about to say that none of this made any sense, but before she did, she looked back up at the stars and moon. She felt the grass beneath the palms of her hands. She felt the warmth of the fire hitting her face. Everything was real. This place was real. "I'm just having a hard time understanding it, I guess," she said. Charles let out a little laugh. "You are not the first one. I've lived on both Earth and in Alaythia since I was a child, so I understand it with the heart of a child. Now it has become part of me. Here's one thing I will say that might help you. Don't try to make sense of it. Just listen to the spirit of Oral Muti, and then you will understand it." Virginia looked at Charles with a raised brow. "Charles, that did not help me one bit." Charles laughed again and smiled. "In time, I think you will know what I'm talking about." Virginia looked at the forest around her. "Where in Alaythia are we, exactly?" "That I can answer," said Charles. "You are in the southern woods of Earth Stars. Several tribes like mine occupy it." "Do they all get along all right?" Charles stirred the embers of the fire with a stick lying beside them. "No, not all of them." Virginia could see something eating at him. "Why? What's wrong?" Charles took a deep breath and stared at the flames. "There was an event that took place generations ago called the Great Division. There was once a great warrior who fought for Oral Muti and his people." "His people?" "Yes, the people of Oral Muti were known as the nation of Amya, but more commonly known as the Waters of Alaythia." He touched the dagger strapped to Virginia's leg. "This great warrior wore the dagger of the people of Amya, a gift from Oral Muti, like this one you and I carry. He was blessed incredibly by Oral Muti, so much so that his spirit fell upon the warrior and made him one of the greatest undefeated fighters in the land. The opposing armies of Skal Galmudorets tried to claim his life, but he was unstoppable. But then, something happened that no one, not even he, saw coming. A terrible threat divided the tribes and the lands. The people he was fighting for, those behind him, were fighting against each other, while the armies in front of him advanced even more because of everyone's disunity." Virginia squinted her eyes, as if trying to read a word in front of her. "Okay, you completely lost me in all of that. And what was that weird-sounding place you mentioned? What?" Charles smiled. "Skal Gamurerets. What's that?" "It's a kingdom that exists in Alaythia, far off near the eastern bounds. A place full of every kind of darkness known and unknown to man. They say that the land is so barren of anything good and true that you can feel the emptiness in your spirit the closer you near its borders." Virginia sat closer to Charles. "And the warrior, did he fight off the armies of She shook her head and gave up. "Of this evil kingdom, was he able to unify the people once again?" Charles shook his head. "No, not entirely anyway." "What happened to him?" "When the Great Division took place, chaos flooded the peoples of Alaythia. Nation was against nation, neighbor against neighbor, and tribe against tribe. Yet he was one of the few who kept his mind and heart pure, he and his tribe with him. Instead of following the tide, he followed through with other obligations." "What other obligations?" "Before the chaos hit, he had rescued a beautiful young woman from the clutches of an opposing tribe. He took her into Alaythia, to the ancient city of Oral Muti, called the City of the Lion, where she discovered who she was and what she was meant for. She became one of the greatest warriors of Alaythia and fought by his side to the very end. But once the chaos broke loose, he knew it was too dangerous for her to remain in Alaythia. Too many people wanted her dead. She needed to leave before things got worse. He needed to protect her." "Who was she?" Charles looked into Virginia's eyes. "Rose Anne Marie Cohen." Virginia's eyes lit up. "What about the warrior? What happened to him?" "Well, long story short, he got her home safely, then returned to Alaythia to help restore the balance. The plan was that after the balance had been restored to a better level, he would return for her, and they would both return to Alaythia to further the mission together." Charles lowered his head. However, things did not go as balanced as he had hoped. He returned for her, keeping his promise, hoping they could still do something together, but when he arrived back at her house, she was not there. Charles stirred the fire some more. Her family unexpectedly returned to their home overseas, and she was forced to go with them. Sorrow filled Virginia's eyes. Burning Eagle. That's terrible. Yes, and he was depressed too. What happened to him next? He went back to the only life he knew. He went back to Alaythia. The years passed, and the two warriors that once fought side by side became all but a legend. But it was not the end. The warrior married another, and had two sons, becoming the ruling tribes, the two ruling kingdoms, if you will, of the northern and southern woods of Earthstars in Alaythia. I'm 99% sure, but I have to ask him. The warrior. Who was he? What was his name? He was known by the tribal name that the people gave him once the spirit of Oralmuti consumed him. He was known as Burning Eagle. Virginia's eyes weighed heavy with guilt. The diary. It was true. Everything that Rose talked about was true. She lowered her head and stared into the flames of the dying fire. Here, said Charles. Let me see your wound. Virginia stretched out her leg as best she could. I can barely bend it. Here, let me see. Charles sat up and rested her swollen leg on his knee. His shirt was still wrapped tightly around the bullet wound, now consumed with dark, sticky blood. You'll need to get this looked at further, he said. Tomorrow we will head west to the tribe of the Naomi. They will know how to treat your wound properly. Charles walked over to his backpack. Grabbing it, he brought it over to where Virginia was sitting. For now, this will have to do, he said. He pulled out a long strand of cloth out of his bag. He unraveled the shirt around Virginia's leg and tossed it into the fire. He reached into his bag and pulled out a gourd canteen. Emptying some of its water on her leg, he wiped her wound clean with his cloak. Then, after taking the fresh cloth, he dressed a new bandage around her leg. Is that your tribe? She asked. The Naomi? No, that's not my tribe, but they are really close to my people. We both look out for each other. We have a strong covenant with them. Charles finished dressing the wound. For now, you need to get some rest. We'll have a long walk ahead of us tomorrow. He pointed to the hammock suspended from two trees in the distance across from the fire. I'll be sleeping in the hammock over there. I made you a bed right here, next to the fire. You looked like you were getting cold, so I thought you would want to sleep by the fire. Virginia looked to her right and saw two wool blankets lying on a bed of white flowers and lush fern leaves. Thank you. Charles stood up and reached out his hand. Virginia took it, and with a gentle lift, Charles escorted her to the pallet. Carefully, he helped her sit down on the bed of flowers and leaves. Here you go, he said, handing her backpack to her. I always like to use a backpack as a pillow when hiking through the woods. While it's not exactly the cloud-like pillows that we're all used to back home, it does help to keep your head off the ground. Virginia smiled as she took her backpack. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to get some shut-eye. We need to get an early move on it tomorrow. Charles walked over to his hammock. Charles, said Virginia. Charles turned around. Yes? Can I ask 2 more questions? Sure. Who are the people trying to kill me? Charles looked into Virginia's eyes apologetically. I wish I could answer all your questions, Virginia, but the truth is that I honestly do not think it is my place to tell you everything. All your questions will be answered in the city of Gaal. Virginia lowered her head. Her question remained unanswered. I told you of the tribal warrior, Burning Eagle, continued Charles. Virginia raised her head, a hopeful expression on her face. Back many generations ago, even before the Great Division, the tribes of the woods fought against each other. Some desired peace and lived in peace with other tribes. However, other tribes wanted the power to reign and rule in all the woods, which were known simply as the Woods of Earthstars back then. There was no northern or southern added to its name originally. One chief of a tribe from the center of the Woods of Earthstars had 2 sons. One came to be known as Burning Eagle, and the other came to be known as Bloodstar. Both were strong in physique and greatly talented in the art of combat. The chief prized Burning Eagle as his favorite son, and once Oralmuti blessed him with his power and spirit, the chief elevated Burning Eagle far greater than any of his other children. This taunted Bloodstar because he desired his father to praise him more than Burning Eagle. He was older than his brother, and therefore he would become the next chief of the tribe. However, when the time came for him to receive the blessing as the next chief, his father blessed his younger brother. Burning Eagle became the next chief. Outraged, Bloodstar rose in defiance and attacked the tribe. Many men, women, and children, all innocent, were slain by Bloodstar. It was not until Burning Eagle himself stood up to his brother that Bloodstar was stopped. So he killed him? No. As the story goes, Bloodstar was lying on the ground, helpless and without his weapon, while Burning Eagle towered over him, wielding the medal of Oralmuti. Out of sorrow and pity for his only brother, Burning Eagle let him live, but as punishment for his treasonous act, Bloodstar was banished from the tribe. He and his family. They journeyed out of the woods of Earthstars to Skalgal Mudrorets. Soon his own family left him and returned to the woods of Earthstars, leaving Bloodstar to continue his journey into the darkness of Skalgal Mudrorets alone. One day, while alone in an abandoned wilderness, he encountered a woman. She addressed herself as the Queen of the Eastern Bounds. She inquired how a warrior of the woods of Earthstars would come to be this far out of his homeland. After telling the Queen of his dishonor of not being the leader of his tribe, the Queen promised him that if he were to give her an offspring of both his blood and hers, she would grant him 3 things: an unnaturally long life, a tribe that would reign throughout the entire woods of Earthstars, of which he would be chief, and a power far greater than that of his brother. What happened? Blinded by the Queen's offer, he produced a child for her. Her offspring have reigned throughout the different branches of her kingdom to this day. The tribes of the woods of Earthstars have always called them the Witches of the Eastern Bounds. Are we near to them? These witches? Like, are we near their kingdom? Are there many of them? Charles looked into her eyes. Well, you met one of them today. A cruel young woman who rules with bitterness, spite, and venom. She's a descendant of these witches. She's known as Princess Aniatha. She was the female police officer back at Mason High. Virginia reflected on the woman officer and thought of how the woman had fixed her eyes upon her, that cruel, cold smile that had crossed her face when she stared at her. A cold chill ran down Virginia's spine. Is she the one that wants me dead? Yes, she and many others. And that's all I'm granted to speak concerning that matter. Virginia wrapped her arms tightly around herself. What about Bloodstar? What happened to him? Through her sorcery and witchcraft, the Queen cast a spell upon Bloodstar, and a strong, dark spirit fell upon the warrior. He became very powerful, but something happened that even he did not see coming. His power was not in his strength. While it made him stronger, there was a side effect. He was able to turn into a dark, hideous creature. His power was only at its fullness when he was in this form. Using this as his weapon, he returned to the woods of Earthstars and back to his old tribe with new darkness leading him. Once again, he attacked the tribe. None of the warriors knew what was attacking them or how to fight it. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. It attacked them like a ghost, slaughtering every warrior it confronted. Warriors would stand guard all night around the tribe. They would never see it, but they always heard its howling cry in the night, echoing from the darkness of the woods around them. One by one, warriors were slain, their bodies mangled and torn to shreds. Bite marks were on their necks and claw-like gashes ran down their bodies. One morning in broad daylight, the creature walked into the camp on all fours. The tribe was horrified, but the beast did not attack anyone. A dark cloud, like a mist of black sulfur, surrounded him, and Bloodstar in the flesh arose out of the mist. He boasted that he had single-handedly slain more than 50 of the tribe's warriors in less than a fortnight. He said he would grant the same power to anyone who would follow him. Amazed by his new power and strength and not knowing how to counter such a force, many warriors dropped the medal of Oralmuti and followed Bloodstar. He went from tribe to tribe, performing the same actions and offering the same invitation. Many tribes lost some of their strongest warriors to the dark, alluring attractions of Skalgal Mudrorets. Soon, Bloodstar had his own tribe with his own warriors, who became cursed with the same power and strength bestowed upon him. Like a pack of phantom wolves, they stalked the woods of Earthstars. They are known throughout Alaythia as the Forest Phantoms, the demon wolves of the Witch Queen of Skalgal Mudrorets. They vow not to stop until they have seized control of all the northern and southern woods of Earthstars. Virginia was terrified. They stalk these woods that we're in right now? Fear not, said Charles, smiling. Oralmuti has blessed and gifted the tribes who remain loyal to him with his spirit and tactics to fight against them. While many tribes are divided amongst each other, they all share one common goal: fight off the darkness and resist the tribe of the Forest Phantoms. So, we are safe, right? Asked Virginia worriedly. Yes, we are, said Charles. Oh, good, said Virginia, relieved. How far away is the nearest tribe, then? The tribe of Naomi is about a few miles that way, said Charles, pointing to the west. A few miles away? Charles, a lot can happen in a few miles away. Do not worry. How can you say, do not worry? Look around. We are in the middle of a forest at night, haunted by those things. Who is near that will protect us? Charles walked over, knelt beside Virginia, and took her hand. Virginia, I am one of the warriors who belongs to a tribe of these woods that will not submit to the darkness. My people and I are strong warriors, and Oral Muti has blessed us to fight off the darkness. I am here to protect you, and I promise you I'm not going to leave you. You have my word. The campfire's light blazed against the strong warrior's side as he spoke to her. What tribe are you from? She asked. Charles smiled. That is for a different time. For now, you must rest. What? But... Okay. Rest well, and sweet dreams. With that, he walked over to his hammock. Virginia watched as he removed the massive sword from around his back and leaned it against one of the trees to which his hammock was strapped. In addition, he took off the dagger and tomahawk around his waist and placed them at the base of the same tree. He plopped into his hammock like a boy who had endured a long day of adventure and fun. She smiled. Rest well, Charles. Virginia looked back up at the stars and moon in the sky. The luminous glow from the campfire flickered above on the leaves and branches of the trees. She placed her palms on the bed beneath her. Everything is real. I can feel it. This is not a dream. She looked herself over. Faint sparkles glimmered on her white shirt as it reflected the firelight. On her feet were the hiking boots that her uncle had given her. She stroked the top of them with her fingers. How did these make it through the portal? Why did they not change? She looked over at Charles, who was sound asleep in his hammock. A sorrowful look slowly crossed her face. Rose Cohen. She was right. She lay back down on her bed, her head resting on her backpack for a pillow. She was right the whole time. No one had believed her, not her family, not even those who had come years after her and heard her story, not even me. She looked up into the heavens above. Oh, I wish I knew more about what she went through, she said. What adventures did she have? What perils and long sufferings did she endure in this mysterious place? She rolled over on her side. Oh, I wish I had a map or something. I honestly don't even know what these so-called southern woods of Earth stars look like on a large scale. Her eyes shot open as a thought quickly ran through her mind. Instantly, she sat up and pulled her backpack in front of her. She opened its flap and unloosed its drawstring. Please be here. Please be here. She gasped excitedly. She could not believe her eyes. Lying at the bottom of her backpack was the diary of Rose Cohen. It was the only item found in her backpack. All her schoolbooks were gone. Not even a pencil was found in her bag. Only the diary remained. She reached in, pulled it out, and held it in front of her. This book was no longer the holder of fairy tales or lost, out-of-reach fables. It was now her guide to help her understand this new place. Oh, man, said Virginia. I hope there's something in here that can help me. She slowly untied the red ribbon wrapped around the book and opened the diary where she had left off. Burning Eagle took me to a distant, secluded place in a remote part of the evergreen forest. In the center of a small clearing sat an ancient fountain hewn out of a rock that came up from the earth. There we found a man dressed in a tan tunic and a brown cloak at the fountain. In his hands he held an iron scepter. When we approached him, Burning Eagle placed me in his arms. He told me that this man was his best friend. The man was known as Elyamin, king of Alaythia. The man had several things about him, but what always remained in my mind was the smile he always seemed to carry, seen through his bushy, bearded face. All three of us stayed there for 3 days. King Elyamin and Burning Eagle fed me and gave me water from the fountain. Then, on the 3rd day, Elyamin and Burning Eagle set off to lead me on what I came to know as the most incredible adventure of my entire life. A strange cry echoed throughout the forest. Virginia gasped and closed the book. She quickly looked around her, holding her hand over her heart. She listened carefully, but did not hear the cry again. She chuckled and looked back down at the diary. She stroked her hand across its top cover. A thought came to her. She opened the book and began flipping through its pages. It was somewhere around this part, she whispered to herself. Somewhere. She stopped flipping. Placing her finger under each word, she carefully studied the script written in front of her. I asked him if he was an angel. No, he said. I am not an angel. He told me that he was human, just like me. He said he was part of a unique, select tribe of warriors that had been blessed with the spirit of the one he called Oralmuti. Virginia looked over her shoulder at Charles, resting in his hammock with his back to her. She began to study him with the same curious eye. She shook her head. Ridiculous. She closed the diary, tied the ribbon back around the book, and carefully placed it beside her backpack. I shall pick you back up where I left off in the morning, she said reassuringly. She placed her bag where it was before and lay down to rest her head. Then looking up into the night sky, she began to imagine all that had taken place, the attempt on her life at school, and while running through the woods, somehow miraculously making it across that rather large gorge and traveling through a portal of light and fire into a new world. She placed her hand on her backpack beneath her head. I can only begin to imagine what Rose's adventures were once like. She smiled. And I get to be her reader. She slowly closed her eyes and fell asleep in the cool of the evening. Princess Aniatha pushed her way through the thorn bushes and tree branches. A deathly look was in her eye. She did not concentrate on anything else, not even the multiple cuts and scrapes on her arms and face made by plowing through the thickness of the woods. Instead, she kept her gaze straight as she rushed through the forest. Cohen, she said. Cohen, I'm coming for you. Cohen, I will find you. Two pairs of green eyes followed beside Aniatha to her right and left. Their description was vague. Dark yellow, red, and black sulfur began to fume from their mouths and nostrils. Their breathing was like the deep groans of two wild animals. They pushed through the woods with their princess. There it is, shouted Aniatha. In the distance was the gate, hidden deep within the pines of the forest. She ran out of the thicket of the woods into the opening where the two trees that created the arch stood. The lanterns on either side of the archway were glowing, and the sheet of light within the gate continued to radiate. Aniatha slowly approached the gate and stood before the light, looking up at the sign above. Its words were still set ablaze by fire. She closed her eyes tightly and faced downward, gnashing her teeth firmly. The two sets of green eyes ran out of the woods. There stood Darkcry, his figure more bulgingly muscular than before, causing the sleeves of his uniform to rip and the buttons to pop off. The other one was growing more in strength, almost matching Darkcry. They stood back, questioning in their minds what Aniatha was thinking. Darkcry kept silent, while the other one made his way forward. My princess, he began. As fast as lightning, Aniatha whirled around and aimed her pistol at him. Then, without saying a word, she pulled the trigger and sent a bullet through his chest. The tall, powerful henchman fell backward to the ground. The green in his eyes faded away as his body turned pale white. Instantly, his body vanished like dust and fell to the earth. All that remained was a mist of yellow, red, and black sulfur coming to a slow dissolve. Darkcry looked down as he saw his comrade vanish before his eyes. He looked back and saw Aniatha pointing the gun directly at his forehead. I told you I would kill you if they reached the gate before us, she said. Did I not? Darkcry fell to one knee and lowered his head. Yes, my princess. Yes, you did. Aniatha walked over and placed the barrel of the gun on top of the head of the giant Indian. Has not my mother been gracious to your people? Has she not provided the blessing of her power to your tribe year after year? Yes, my princess. And has she not been faithful to keep her side of the covenant that your tribe has made with her? Darkcry began to tremble. Yes, yes, my princess. Aniatha pulled the gun away from Darkcry's head and tossed it into the woods. She knelt on one knee to his level and gracefully stroked her hand across his cheek. And have I not loved you with all my heart? Darkcry raised his head and met her eyes with his. Yes, my love. Yes. She drew close and kissed his lips, sharing the taste of a witch and a beast. "We must not let them get away, my love," she said. "We must not let them reach the canyon. If she crosses it, our chances of finding her and the diary will be lost. My powers do not grant me victory beyond those borders. The closer we get to the city of Gaal, the more my powers weaken. We must hurry with all haste." Instantly, she stood up. Taking his hands in hers, she pulled him up. She ran to the light in the gate and led Darkrai with her. "This is the worst part for me," said Aniatha. "Me too, my love," said Darkrai. "Me too." Aniatha and Darkrai charged through the light. Darkrai yelled loudly into the night. Birds in the treetops scattered into the sky at the quake of his voice. Aniatha gnashed her teeth tighter, refusing to let out a cry. "I hate that light," groaned Darkrai. "Every time, it always burns." Aniatha stood tall, showing no sign of pain. "Ignore it. We have other matters to focus on." Aniatha was no longer fashioned in a black police uniform. She wore a dress of deep scarlet red. A golden lace belt was strapped around her waist, fastening a long curved dagger on her side. Her long black hair fell past her shoulders and trailed down to the middle of her back. Darkrai's uniform was also gone. He was dressed as before in his black hooded trench coat. A pair of black buckskin pants and a black loincloth covered him from the waist down. A metal choke collar hung around his neck, and his feet were wrapped in black moccasins. On his side was strapped a curved sword. The light of daybreak was slowly etching the morning sky. The darker shade of the night was being slowly pushed back as the deep red colors of dawn's rise were bleeding over the horizon. The trees were like shadowy giants around Darkrai and Aniatha. Darkrai drew a deep smell through his nose. "I smell fresh blood. They are not too far away." "Hunt her down," said Aniatha. "Become the devil that brings fear to this forest and hunt her down." Darkrai closed his eyes and drew another deep breath through his nose. A dark shadow began to form around him until he was lost in a thick, black cloud. There was the sound of bones shifting as the deep breathing of a dark beast panted in the silence of the forest. The sulfur dissolved. Standing in the shadows was a four-legged beast. His paws were massive with nails that were long and curved like the talons of a hawk. His body was solid, powerful, and tense with rage. The arch of his back matched the height of Aniatha's head. His green eyes pierced through the darkness. Yellow sulfur emitted from his nostrils and saliva trailed down from his massive jaws. Aniatha caressed her hand upon the black fur of the beast's shoulder. "Hunt her down, my love. Find her for me."
This is the end of Chapter 9. Tune in next Thursday for Chapter 10. If you'd like to listen to the next chapter ad-free ahead of everyone else, then subscribe to Early Access and tune in on Sunday. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe and share with your friends and family. It really helps the show. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major podcasting platforms. What Shines with the Dawn was written and created by C. Taylor Eason. Copyright Christian Taylor Eason, 2024.